whilst I've got the frame still upside down from fitting the limit switches, just like to talk to you about the final effector assembly problems and the modification I had to do. When I fitted the push arms, push rods, I machined those thicknesses down to be the same and all that as you've seen in the previous video. And I designed the fan cover so as it would cool down the hot end. But when I come to fit the fan onto the actual final assembly with the push rods on, the fan cover is in the centre, or the centre of the fan cover is in line with the centre of the nozzle. So it's equal either side. So the fan would fit on. But as you can see here, it is over this side by about 4 or 5 millimetre. Also, the holes in the bottom mount were not down far enough, and so the fan would hit on the actual effector bracket. So I had to melt the holes in the bracket at the back to almost breaking through the lower, file a bit of the face of the fan to actually clamp down tight. Otherwise, it was sitting on an angle like that. The plate, which will lead to cracking and all that later, so eliminate that problem. So then but then I go to put the linkage ball joint there, and that actually is hitting into the fan as these photos show by quite a few millimetre, about 3 millimetre, up to where the screw is. So I actually had to gouge most of that area of the fan away just to get some movement back into the linkage. When it's over one particular way, see how the fan's moving, and there not so much. So again, another bracket of something else to fit at some fan, some hot end, some other time, and you have to modify it. So before you fit your arms to your effector assembly and then see what problems you have. Get these to move around. Also, in some positions, the effector arms were binding, but now, as you can see, I've had to grind, well, you don't have to, but I ground about 2 millimetre off each face, and in some positions it just clears when it's certain further one way than the other. But if you do grind it, you got to remember that there's even tension around the ball in the original manufacture. When you grind it, you're then allowing the ball to have more force on one side than the other. So it may lead to binding of the ball. So that's what you need to check. If you've got the loose balls, that may help, but if you've got a tighter ball, it can make it fairly stiff. So if you are going to grind them, pick your loosest ones. So if this was a tight one and that was a loose one, swap them end over end and then grind the loose ones, and that will help make it tighter. So now the effector assembly is now free to move around without binding and perhaps on the fan. But once the printer's going, I can make up another plate here and make it suit. Also, there's a finished probe. Allow the spring to go over the terminal, so as the terminal goes into the spring, and that helps stop it from moving, but it can almost touch. The little fan ducting I made, quite light, and that now holds the probe without much slack as what it had before. And also, see if you can pick it up, the probe goes in on an angle, so that's not square or perpendicular, but that manages to keep it there. So in the end, I managed to get it working quite well. Triggers, not so much slack is in it. The end of the ribs is probably about 2 mil shorter than the height of the fan. I did have a nut on it originally pushing it down. If you invert this to hold it back down, you have to cut too much away for the fan for the inlet. So when I design my own, I'll be making sure that they match fan heights, and then you could put a nut, 6mm nut on that thread, and it won't even have to be mounted to the fan. The actual shroud will mount directly to the hot end, so the fan can be free to just line up. So I think that would be a better idea. I haven't put any covers on the side. I'll just check again with the wind gauge and see how much is actually blowing and that sort of thing. So that's now up to the stage of putting the cabling on. Use that cabling already that I've mentioned, the sleeving. This is the thermometer for the electronics temperature, and that happens to run in with the sleeving that's in there already, so there's enough space. And when I put the extruder on, there should be enough space to even put a third wire down here. So if not, I'll pop it on the other side. So that's how neat your cabling can look, and for $5 extra or so, it can look a lot more professional. I have had some problems with my probe triggering. The little brass terminal that I originally used, the screws, because they're fairly small, if you over tighten them, they'll easily strip the thread. There's only about 1 or 2 thread crests in it, and also they were a bit on the small side. So one problem was that the spring would gradually push the clamping, make it loose, and the terminal would come down here, and what would happen was that when it's in the upright position, there is a lot of tension on the spring, and when you release it, that sort of gives it a bit of a jolt and it would trigger. But the problem then was that if you just move the probe up slightly, it wouldn't clear. So it would be on, triggered, go up, not triggered, go down, and it would still not be triggered because there was not enough. There were several reasons. One, the bend in the actual Allen key hole meant that it was tilted the other way. Instead of sitting flat like that, it was sitting on an angle like that. So when it come to touch the actual lever on the micro switch, it was tending to hit the housing more than the actual lever, because this micro switch needs to be almost touching the housing to trigger. It's not like it's at 2mm above. So that was causing that problem, and then the loosening spring was the other problem. So look, I don't know whether the curve of the Allen key was actually hitting the housing, say here, before it would touch on the lever. So what I did was I glued eraldite, a little packer, 1mm, can be 1 or 2mm on there. You lose that in the height, but I've got a lot of height here anyway. Then what I also did was I went to the next size up in the terminal blocks, and they take a M3 screw. This is, I think, 440 or one of the smaller UNC ones, and I would use cap screws to tighten it up. Now the problem too was that when it was down the bottom, the spring would actually hit on the edge of the flanges here. So go down, hit, not trigger, and bend them both. So what I done was with the brass one, it's sort of U-shaped with a bar up the top, so that's the shape of it. I filed off the corners to allow the brass terminal, it's up to here now, to go inside the spring. So instead of the spring collapsing on itself, like that, it would stay reasonably straight. Also, I gave it the maximum compression. 2 reasons. One, that's then stronger on the micro switch, but also there's less distance for the spring to allow it to become cockeyed. You can hear it clicking. So to test yours, if you're having intermittent problems where your probing and it goes, oh yeah, it worked, then it doesn't, and it may dig in and all these sort of problems. Just slightly push the probe up and just gently let it go. And if you don't hear that double click, you know that's the solution you need. Also, I thought that rather than going with all this crap here about bending that out and cutting it off and then bending up safety pins and all that, I noticed that if you use one of the end stops, you get 6 in the kit, 3 spare, and just have it sitting up here, you would probably need to make another holder. You can just use your end stop trigger mechanism with the lever pointing down that way. So as when the Allen key hits it, it pushes it in like that. And it fits up, comes up about this high, and you've got 2 wires anyway for this particular one. You then can run it, connect it properly to the ramps board, and then you'll have an LED flashing on and off when it's triggering, so you can see that it's working or not working. And it's not taking up that much more real estate because it's basically one of these twisted with a LED and a little bit of PCB. So once the printer's going, you then can make all the alterations and the parts that are second rate or could be improved. So that's a fix for that. The guide's working fine, fan director's working fine, so it's just going through the calibration stages now, and I will show you how to do that as we get through this long day.